Hey there, welcome back to another episode of Savor Food and Body. And if you've been listening earlier this month, you heard our guest today already talk about fats. So Ami Karnosh is a nutritionist living in the Seattle area, and she is back to talk about proteins today, which is going to kind of wrap up our three-part series on Gentle Nutrition 101 for midlife. So we talked about carbs a handful of months ago. We've recently talked about fats, and now we're going to talk about proteins. And you can get to the link to all of these episodes down in the show notes, including the link to Amy's work and the introduction that we did with Amy in previous episodes. So Amy, thanks for coming back, and we're going to dive into protein today. What are some of the myths around protein, particularly for midlife? How much do we need? How much do we not need? How does our body work with protein? And kind of help us unpack all of this.
Wow, it is one of those that is like a really big topic and a really tiny topic all at the same time. It's not as complicated as we like to make it seem. And also, like everything, like every single nutrient, there's an incredible spectrum to what our needs are and how they shift throughout life. And also those general recommendations that may or may not actually have anything to do with you and your body. So with that, let's talk just a little bit about how much protein you need. And I want to state, if you're ever in one of my classes or we're working together one-on-one, you know that I say, okay, here's the average. Let's throw that out the window and let's talk about you. And when we're discussing this, and by the way, Amanda had mentioned, just use her contact information, alpinenutrition.org, and you can send her your questions. You're also welcome to go to thenutritionadvocate.com and email me there too. So anytime, go ahead and message me. So with the protein recommendations, when we look at the recommendations, they're called RDAs, recommended daily allowance, or recommended dietary allowance. The USDA puts averages out, and we have to start from somewhere. And we have usually young child to growing child to adult, and then older adult in those recommendations. And then they divide them by gender, male, female. A lot of those recommendations truly come from either the 1920s, and by the way, most of them were determined during or just after the Great Depression in the 1920s by measuring white children's bodies or white women's bodies in psychiatric wards or white men's bodies in prisons. So definitely did not meet our actual population of people or so many things. So it started from a certain place, and over the years, every 5 years or so, the US will analyze or take into consideration those recommendations, observe them and change them, but it's a slow process. It's a slow process. And we're looking at literal billions of people and trying to say, okay, we're going to do an average. And from that average, especially starting in the 1920s with white people's bodies in the Great Depression, there was a difference in female body structure, what was considered a female body, the average or desirable female body, and a male body. And those were size differences. Those are height differences. Culturally, there's differences on how much a person eats, when a person eats. Depending on where I was eating, I grew up in farmland, so we prepare the lunch, take the lunch out to people in the fields who are working, and I'd always start to eat, and my aunt would say, oh, silly, the men always eat. The men have to eat. They have to eat because they need the energy, right? We don't need the energy. We're just silly at home. We're just preparing the food. That wasn't my entire childhood, just part of it, but that sticks with you. That's cultural as well. Um, I can tell you, definitely, I eat first.
I was going to say,
Thank
there's
you.
so many conversations, which is a
I
totally
have that
different
choice,
episode around that.
right? So all of that goes to, though, the decision of what makes up a female or male body. And thank goodness we are at this stage in our culture. We've opened so much up of understanding what that average is. And that average isn't necessarily the expectation, or the expectation isn't the actual average. So that's literally all to lead up to me saying, if you look at it, there is a difference between men and women listing. And I tend to throw that out the window. If you're like, I don't know, should I follow the men's or the women's? Just take an average and go in between. But you're going to be fine. So, especially if your body size, if you're a 6'2" female body, you are going to have a much taller than average body. You don't need that tiny little amount of protein that was made for, I think the average is, it was between 5'2" and 5'4" was the average. And I think they increased it to 5'4" for a female body. I am way above that. I was surpassed that in like 5th or 6th grade. I was already 5'6", 5'7". So that didn't apply because protein doesn't have so much to do with your gender. It has to do literally with your body size. Protein makes up cell walls. Protein makes up structures of our muscles. Protein makes up literally the structures of our bodies. And so if we have bigger bodies, we need more protein. If we have smaller bodies, we need less protein. If we have growing bodies, we need more protein because we're adding to that structure. If we're no longer growing on average, then we don't need so much. So all of those take into consideration how much protein we need. And the recommendations are between 46 and 56 grams of protein for the average adult. For the average older adult is that amount. And I say, if you don't want to, if you are a gram person, I'm not, but I work with plenty of people who say, I need the numbers. I need to be able to add it up. And that's how I work. And that's what gives me confidence. If you are a numbers person, you want to look at those grams. If you're kind of in that range, you're probably good to go, right? But if not, throw those numbers out the window. Take a look at your food sources. Are you getting protein sources in on a regular basis? You're probably good to go as well. Are you feeling satisfied at your meals? If you get cut or a wound or an illness, are you healing from that in a good amount of time? 3 days later, you got your scab, or you're sort of getting over that cold. Those are good indicators that you're just fine. And you don't necessarily need more. Or are you somebody who gets joy from training for marathons? You do the Ironman competition, which should just change to superpower. Are you regularly breaking down muscle and needing to build that back up? You might need a little bit more. If things like surgery, maybe you're having a minor or major, it doesn't really matter, but there will be literally an incision or a wound. So your body's going to need to heal from that. So you might need a little bit more protein for that time of healing. That's the other thing. I'll hear, because I work with a population that does tend to have more cancer or other risk factors, they'll say, my doctor told me I need more protein because I'm having this big surgery. I'm like, okay, great. Let's work that out. Tell me what you're eating. Let's see if we're having enough protein sources. Tell me when that surgery is, or how long is the healing time. And they go, oh, that was actually 2 years ago. And I go, oh, he's healed from that surgery by now. You're actually good. We can cut back. You don't need to try to be adding in protein powder to to your salad dressing right now. You're fine. We're good to go. So knowing that those amounts, they ebb and they flow, they fluctuate with your personal needs. And again, your healthcare team is going to help you find out what works for you. Then you're fine.
I think that messaging too that we often get in midlife, so particularly like 40s, 50s, and 60s, is that we're decreasing our muscle mass, and that's just part of the process of aging. But in order to support either maintaining muscle mass or even trying to gain muscle mass too, or try to stay ahead of the decline, so to speak, there's recommendations of like we should be having more protein, or we should be really putting more emphasis on protein, coupled with, particularly for women, weight bearing exercise. And of course this goes into bone health conversation as well. And so we're just based on what you were just saying though too, to me, I look at that as like, this is still a season of life. And so just like recovering from a surgery is a mini season, and so this midlife time period is also a season. And where, you tell me if this is right thinking or not, but if we're in perimenopause, maybe we are focusing on getting a little bit more protein in addition to our weight bearing exercise or continuous movement to help us move through the perimenopause transition. But then it's also setting us up for having nice, strong muscles and increased capacity as we transition into postmenopause. And again, that's a season. But then once we're into postmenopause, then, okay, maybe we don't need as much in order to be stressing our kidneys or anything like that. But I don't know, how does that land with you for this midlife season? What would you say?
I think you totally nailed it with that we're the whole function of perimenopause, right? We're coming into this shift, to this change, which is completely normal, natural, and could be 6 months for somebody. It could be 5 years for somebody else. Once again, what's normal and natural for one person looks so different than another person. And part of that is the shifting of body structure. What does our body need? We are shifting out of the time where our bodies were gearing up to produce children, to no longer necessarily needing that function as much. So instead of focusing on these hormones for that, we're shifting our body to something else, and our body changes, right? The other thing is our body shape changes a little bit because our bodies want to store up energy to push us through that. And the best source of stored energy for our body is fat. So that might look like feeling a little swollen for somebody for a couple months, or physically being in different sizes of pants for a couple years, which is normal and healthy, by the way. And for somebody else, might have zero impact whatsoever. So because of that, we are looking at general recommendations. Let's increase the protein content to make sure that we're not pulling energy out of the muscle tissue, because, by the way, that protein is stored energy too, just in a different form. In our body, if it needs energy, maybe we're not allowing it to store fat, right? Maybe we're trying to avoid fats. We're scared of having any extra softness in our body. So we're trying to avoid that. And our body can't pull from that stored energy to push us into this phase of menopause. It's going to grab energy from somewhere else. And, muscles are part of that. So it's going to grab it from our muscles to push us through that menopause. So we don't want to lose muscle mass particularly. We want to stay strong. And like you mentioned, that is part of bone health too. So staying strong is keeping our bones nice and strong too. Even though bone and muscle are different, they go hand in hand. So that focus of adding more protein so we don't have muscle loss is kind of a mixed bag. Instead, I say, okay, where are we getting our balance of nutrition from? Are we getting enough protein in there? You might need a little more, but know that more protein doesn't automatically result in more muscle. So I think that's part of almost like that gym culture of more protein, more protein, more protein, because that's how you're going to build muscle. More protein, that's just calories, right? And your body is using those calories or using that chemical structure as a tool. Is that tool going for muscle or is it just excess? If we're not actually still moving our body, maybe doing a little bit more weight-bearing exercises versus just our joyful walk around the block sort of situation, we're actually peeing that extra protein out. Just because you threw in an extra 10, 20, 30 grams of protein in that protein drink into our body doesn't mean it automatically goes to muscle unless we're physically building muscle. So I'd like to be really clear. Extra protein doesn't automatically mean extra muscle. We need to build our muscle. We need to do weight-bearing exercise, whether that literally be with you're grabbing those soup cans out of the cupboard, and then you're going to do a few curls with those soup cans, move around with them. You're going to do a couple push-ups against the wall just with your body. You don't need to go get a home gym for this weight bearing. It literally just means pushing against those muscles, right? So if protein corresponded exactly with muscle, our country would be the most muscular country in the world because we have some of the highest protein intakes of the entire world. Yeah. So more protein if you need it. Are you mindfully realizing, oh, okay, I don't do weight-bearing exercise. Let's add that in a little bit. Okay, then we're going to possibly be building muscle. Let's do that. Let's add in a little more protein source so our body has the tool to build that muscle now that we're doing a little bit more mindful movement that way. Or you know that you're moving, you have perimenopause, you know you're moving through there, or you're at a stage of life where you're leading up to it. You know that your body's going to want to pull energy and you want to build up and be prepared for that. You might add a little extra protein there too. But it has to sort of be in that conjunction. It has to be with that movement. You can't lay in bed all day and then drink the protein drink and be like, look at my biceps.
Well, and one of the things I want to bring us back to too is, and just remind folks from those other episodes, and you kind of said something along these lines to reminded me of this, is we can't have increased protein intake at the expense of energy in other areas, aka carbohydrates. And so if you're upping your protein because you've heard that that's cool to do, but you're afraid of eating those carbohydrates, then you could end up, you're not going to store the carbohydrate in the form of building muscle, or store the protein in the form of building muscle. You're going to be using it just to like fuel your brain too and function and like try to do the job that the carbs are doing. So we can't have up one at the expense of the other. I think that's really important for folks to hear. And then even when we were talking about in the fats conversation too, is that protein and fat are both there to help with satisfaction, to increase fullness with our meals and the satiation, the staying power of that meal, so that we don't find ourselves with our hands in the bottom of the M&M's bag at 4 o'clock in the afternoon and then wonder why we're overeating or we're binging on these high carb foods. Two things there. If we're restricting the carbs and upping our protein, we're still going to find ourselves in these cravings and overeating and binging on carbs. And if we're not getting enough protein or fats, we could still have ourselves stuck in that cycle. So just emphasizing again, it's important to have a balance of meeting all of our macronutrient needs.
100%. You're so right there, because if we're just looking at calories again, then we might go, okay, I'm getting 100 extra calories in because I need extra protein. Let me cut that from somewhere else. That's not going to be healthy either. Forget the calorie content, because protein and carbohydrates both have 4 calories per gram. And again, remember, they're just tools. They're tools for your body. What do we want to do? Our brain wants carbohydrates. It needs it. And if we are thinking, okay, I'm going to cut back on the carbohydrates and just focus on protein, well, you're in a different spiral. So if you need to increase protein, look at that variety of food again. Look at how well you're being satisfied, and knowing that protein comes from so many more spaces than we may think it comes from. That's something that for years, in my private practice, a little bit, we'll do diet diaries, just logging what you're eating on average, just so we can see, okay, here we go. Okay, I see that you're having this, or you might be missing out on these core nutrients because I'm not finding these food groups. That's all diet diary means. It's just information, right? But I also took diet diaries, 20, 30, 40 diet diaries a day, working on the women's health study as an intern years and years ago, and calling people. And I would log protein because that was part of it. And out of hundreds of dietary logs, there was only ever one person I ever saw that wasn't actually meeting protein goals. And a lot of folks would say, oh, I'm sure I'm so low in protein. I'm so low in protein for so many reasons. Or my doctor told me, or my gym person told me, I was probably too low in protein. And I look at it and I'm like, actually, you're about 20 or 30 grams over. Because we forget protein comes from so many more places than just meat. Meat, absolutely. That's a great source of protein. It's a really strong source of protein, but it's not the only source of protein. Even a piece of lettuce has protein. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not going to have much protein. If you're just trying to meet your protein needs on lettuce alone, you're going to be eating a lot of lettuce. But you could do it. You can do it. So it's looking at that variety again. And any of those protein sources that are also going to have that balance of carbohydrate and fat in them too are going to be awesome. And those are our wonderful nuts and seeds that are going to have our omega-3 fats. They're going to have fiber. They're going to keep us full, depending on how we eat them. Like, do you like them with a little bit of heavy and salt? Do you like them with a little chili spice and rosemary? You're going to be satisfied with those. But also our beans, legumes, lentils, those are all great sources of protein. And certain whole grains are great sources of protein too. So you can have a breakfast cereal that is not fortified with a refined form of protein, but just naturally has protein in it, or amaranth or quinoa. All of these grains are also good. And by the way, whole wheat is a great source of protein too. Speaking of muscle building, again, tie in a little bit of the science. I love to go through, there's something called PubMed. It's our sort of national library of all the medical research that's been published. And every few months or a couple times a year, I go in certain topics, I'll research and see what's new. What has come up? Is there anything changed? Are we doubling down on so much information? And one of them specific to protein and building that I absolutely love was looking at bodybuilders. So these are people, this is their job. They are weightlifters, bodybuilders. This is where they earn their livelihoods. So smaller core group, but they still had a good amount. The majority were men, but there were still some women in there too. And essentially they divided them out and they all had the same amount of protein. Their goal was, I think it was around like 90 grams, but it was a very specific amount. But they divided it out. So there was a group that just could get their protein from anywhere as long as they were logging their food in to make sure that they were getting in that specific amount of protein a day. There was a core group who was getting it from whey protein powder. There was a core group that was specifically getting it from meat, not protein powder or protein drink, but meats. One from eggs and one from soy. And then there was like a control group that was like rice protein, which is not a lot of protein, but they were getting it up to 90 grams. So these vast groups, by the way, this was funded. You always have to look at the funding. It was funded by a group that when I looked at it, I thought, okay, the whole reason why they did this was because they're selling this very specific protein powder from a very specific source. And they're going to be like, look at how much more muscle mass this group got from getting this very specific type of protein. What ended up happening, and by the way, this was a longer term, hopefully a really good nutrition or food-based study. It's 6 months at minimum, because you can have tons of body changes in short term. So things look quote unquote successful, but they actually don't stick. That's why no diet really works, because if you actually look at long term, it's the staying power of these things doesn't work. So anyway, it was a minimum of 6 months, and then they went 9 months, and then they went a year. So checking them. And what they found, all of this long to say, is they all had the exact same amount of muscle building. They all got the same amount of muscle weight or muscle tone earned, and it had absolutely no impact where that protein came from. So it was the control groups to the ones that ate whatever they want, as long as they were getting X amount of protein balance in a day, soy protein, whey protein, all of it, exact same. So when it comes down to protein quality, quantity, as long as you're getting enough sources, and again, variety is going to help your whole body in the long term. Satisfaction, making sure you're not missing out on other nutrients, then you're good. You're good. So whether your favorite source be, wild salmon, or your favorite source be lentils and walnuts, that doesn't matter. Just get a variety. Remember that, your slices of bread also have protein. Remember that even that banana you're enjoying has a little bit of protein. It all adds up, and your body is all able to use it.
I think that's really well said. I think the other version of that too, that I like from our friend and colleague, Jen Salop-Huber, who's known as the menopause.nutritionist on social media. She's a great example. Instead of focusing on the how many grams should I be getting, what's enough, is that in midlife, if we can look at protein from having the main characters and then supporting characters. Those might not be her exact words, but I was a theater major, so that's how I heard her exact words. And so if we focus at all of our meals and snacks, or at least all of our meals, we have a main character of protein. So that's our eggs, our fish, our poultry, our meat, our soy. And then if we can also add, so coming from, again, that place of variety and adding, can we add a supporting character too? Be that our beans, our nuts and seeds, our whole grains, our legumes. could be dairy as well. So all of those, they have still decent amounts of protein in them, not the same amount or a little bit less than the main characters of protein, but
Mhm.
they would pair well with the main characters of protein, why we call them supporting characters. So I like the idea of having folks focus on, okay, I've got at least a main character in all of my meals. I'm adding supporting characters when it makes sense to do so or when it feels satisfying to do so. And in our snacks, I've got at least a supporting character. So I've got some nuts or some cheese with my fruit or crackers or something. And thinking about it along those terms, to me, that just seems more livable and doable because it's in the
Mhm.
context of what food do I put on my plate? And
Yeah.
we don't put grams on our plates. I mean, unless we're weighing and measuring, which that's then a whole different conversation because we're talking about disordered eating behaviors then. But if we're getting to the place where I just want to have this relationship with food and put it into the context of I am putting food on my plate, I am shopping for food, I am writing a grocery
Mhm.
list of food and
Mhm.
keeping it in that space, then we will, in my opinion, will always have enough protein and we
Mhm.
won't be entering into that space of maybe we're getting too much. And like you said earlier, too much, we're just going to pee it out. But that also stresses our kidneys out to be doing that filtering of the too much and for us to pee it out. So anytime we can focus on the food and focus on those main characters and focus on the supporting characters, we can trust that we're going to get enough. We're going to get what our body needs.
Absolutely. That's, always coming down to as long as we're eating that variety, you're going to know if you are missing something. You're not going to have energy. Your mood is going to be completely off. Your cycles of cravings and all of that are going to be off. Your hormones are going to be completely out of whack, and you know you're going to be at the doctor going, I don't know what's going on. That's how we know. If you're not having any of those symptoms, or even if you are, and they're not controlling your life, it's here or there. We're always going to have a day where we're not feeling like getting out of bed. That's fabulous. That's normal. It's part of life. But it's a different thing when every day you're struggling, like, I can't stay awake, or I just feel like I went to the gym, or I went to go for the walk, or I went to do my little weight bearing exercise, and 3 in, I just couldn't anymore. I had to go take a nap. That's a totally different thing than having that normal, like, it's 2 o'clock, I need to take a nap, or go rest or meditate for 5 minutes and I'll be ready to go again. So balance, 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 looking at that variety, knowing what those higher sources of protein are. Are you including them? Not just once or twice a day, but in throughout what you're eating, because again, balancing carbohydrate, fat, protein together, that's going to be a satisfying snack. That's going to be a satisfying breakfast. And you don't need a higher amount of one over another, because protein can't do what fat does. Protein can't necessarily do what carbohydrates do, just like carbohydrates can't necessarily do everything that fat does or protein does. We need the whole family together to have a really good balance that's going to give us long-term vitality. And that's the key. So nut seeds, again, nuts and seeds of any variety. So if you were like, oh, I love sunflower seeds, but I hate pumpkin seeds, well, that's fine. It's not one type of seed over another. If you love walnuts and you hate hazelnuts, whatever, or filberts if you're from the country. I once asked my family, somebody kept saying that hazelnuts were better. And what's the difference? And my aunt said, one's from the country and one's from the city. So
Well,
whatever
as an
nut you have,
Oregonian, yeah, as an Oregonian, I
exactly.
would say like, no, it's filberts. But I
It's
haven't
filbert.
heard any other states talk about filberts versus hazelnuts.
My favorite is sidetrack at the co-op that I used to do tours for. I would show people the bulk bins and we'd look to see, how can you tell nutrition? There'd be a little nutrition label and you'd scoop everything out and how to read ingredients. And my favorite was to go to the hazelnut bin because it says hazelnut ingredients, filberts.
That's not confusing.
That was my favorite label. So we were right all along, Amanda. They're filberts. But anyway, so no, if you have a favorite, that's totally fine. It's not like, oh, I can't have, fill in the blank because Amy said walnuts were better, so I can't have my almond. No, they're all good. Just if you're enjoying them, include them. Certain ones like peanut, we call it a nut. It's not really a nut. It's actually a legume. So that has, yes, higher amounts of protein than, say, an almond or a walnut, but that doesn't mean you have to choose one or the other. Choose them all. Choose them all. Remember, we want to expand. The more variety we have, the better off we are. And like you said, if we need to supplement, sometimes we do need to supplement. Maybe either our access to foods that we have is limited. Maybe we have certain allergies to, maybe you're allergic literally to a few of those main sources. Just because eggs are a good source of protein, if you have an allergy to eggs, you should not be eating those eggs, right? So if you do have restrictions for whatever reasons they are, maybe you are going through an illness and it's harder for you to eat those foods, it's also okay to supplement at times. You can get those drinks or fortified foods. I prefer not to rely on them because, like I said before, if we're eating the food itself, we're getting in a balance. We're already getting in those vitamins and minerals and fibers and fats and carbohydrates. And in a supplement, we can't. It's made to literally supplement or fill in blanks or add to. But if you are having troubles getting to that level, like you need more, you're preparing for that surgery, or you're starting out on your exercise journey, or you find that, oh my gosh, I actually really love weightlifting. I'm doing this more often. I'm gonna, need to really increase my protein to support that muscle building. But you're not there yet with the food sources. Grab throw in some protein powder to your smoothie or into your bowl of oatmeal. That's okay too. Just don't rely on it, because also excess is excess. Those tend to be really high sources. In a scoop of protein powder, you might have, 20, 30 grams of protein, right? And in your smoothie, you might have 5, 10 grams of protein. It doesn't matter who you are. Our digestive system can only absorb so much at a certain time. The average person, let's say 25 or so grams, that fluctuates, right? So one person that might be 20, another that might be 30, or just, again, that silly average again. But just because you're getting in 60 grams of protein in a meal does not mean you are absorbing that. Most likely, your body's taking in whatever it needs at that time. Let's even increase that. Let's say you got 30 grams in and your body soaked it up. They're like, yes, I needed this protein. And it soaked it all up. What happens to that extra 30? It doesn't just get made into muscle. It doesn't like, oh, I know, I'll add to that bicep. What it does is it has to go through our kidneys and get filtered out, and you pee it out. You literally pee out that excess. So just grabbing those supplements isn't always the way to go. And it's certainly not necessarily going to create that satisfaction, create that feeling of fullness with extended energy that you're not 10, 20 minutes or an hour later going, I didn't eat and my body wants to eat. I may not be hungry, but I actually wanted a meal. That's what I wanted. I wanted to sit down and eat a meal, but I drank my 60 grams of protein in that shake. you're really excreting it out. That is also potential for that long term. Short term, I'm not worried about it short term. I say it all the time, and I'm going to say it again. Our bodies are miracles. Our bodies know what to do. They're going to take that and they go, oh, look at all this extra stuff they gave us. Can we use it? Nope, not right now. Let's clean it out. But just like everything in the world, if you have a lot of cleaning that's building up, same thing in the body. You're just taking in huge amounts of protein from these supplements every day for extended periods of time. It's going to be stressful. It's going to start stressing out those kidneys. There's a higher incidence of getting things like your bladder infections, which already increases with perimenopause too. Our kidneys don't need that much. So more isn't better. More is not better.
Yeah, that's really important. And I think a good segue into just, summing up the series in that more or less is not better of any one of these three macronutrients. They work in concert together and they support our body in a symphonic sort of way, thinking about, them as players in a band or in a symphony, and we need each one of them, and they all do their different parts, and we need a variety of foods within each one of those categories to have a well-balanced, gentle approach to our nutrition, particularly in midlife.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just if you were wondering like how much, again, you can call Amanda, you can have a talk with your individual provider or your nutritionist or dietitian. They can help you look at what you're eating and see if you're, because it is, again, body size. We're maintaining a certain body size. So that number really is very fluid. If so, focus less on the number, focus more on your body size. I also like to tell people that palm of your hand thing. So, if you're like, oh, I need to know, are you at least having something that's a key protein source in your meal? Would it fit in the palm of your hand, whether it be like a tuna salad or, peanuts or whatever it is that you're eating? Are you getting enough in there? That's probably enough. It varies, but it's, not one walnut isn't going to do it. Nor is necessarily a 16-ounce steak. That'll do it. It'll probably be more than you actually need.
Get it out. Yeah. But like Amy said, like if you have questions for either one of us, you're welcome to get in touch with us either through alpinenutrition.org and through the contact button there, or through Amy's website, thenutritionadvocate.com. And again, those links are below wherever you're watching this. So Amy, thank you so much for helping with this Nutrition 101 for Midlife series. It's been a pleasure to get to pick your brain about some of this information, because you're just a wealth of knowledge.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I always love talking to you. So